Good afternoon, one and all the students, innovators, startups, and enthusiasts in the ecosystem. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of iHub Government of Gujarat and Department of Higher and Technical Education to this special webinar by our special guest, Mr. Anirudh Damani, who is the managing partner of Artha Ventures. Welcome, Anirudh, to this special session, and entire Gujarat ecosystem is eager to learn from you how to set up to start up. I would like to urge Mr. M. Nagarajan, Commissioner of Higher Education, to share initial thoughts about how Gujarat is building startup ecosystem and how these contexts are very important in days to come. Sir, may I request you to share your initial remark?
Yeah, thank you, Hiranmai. iHub is doing a wonderful job of conducting special webinars, bringing in the movers and shakers of the startup and innovation world to this platform. And we have been trying to engage ever since the COVID days started to engage with the startups and innovators and also the change makers and the mentors in the Gujarat ecosystem. Today we have Anirudh, who is spearheading a very visible and reputable organization, which is a venture fund, and he has been having a portfolio of more than 80 companies, and he has very long experience in guiding the startups in the Artha Venture Fund. So today he is going to talk about how to set up a startup. When we started this journey of knowledge sharing, we started with basics like design thinking, how to identify a problem, this entire journey of mind to market, how this can be done, and how iHub and the entire ecosystem could be geared up to support the student innovators and the entrepreneurs. That was our effort, and we have come to a stage where Gujarat has been continuously for second year been judged as the best performer in the startup ranking by Government of India. That was possible because of all the support from eminent thought leaders like Anirudh, who have helped us and guided us in making this ecosystem very, very vibrant. Now it is the opportunity is open for the innovators and startups to make it, convert it into a sustainable venture and also make them venture capital ready. So we are funding ideas to make them into a startup and make them venture capital ready. And to hear from Anirudh today on how to set up a startup, I'm sure is going to help the entrepreneurs to start with the right note, to keep the big picture in mind, take a long view, and then succeed in their venture and also make an impact for the society. On behalf of Education Department, I welcome Anirudh for this session and congratulate the team at iHub for putting this yet another edition of this special webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for putting the context in place. I just would add a couple of more lines about Anirudh. He's a very known figure in the investment ecosystem, but still just to brief about him to the Gujarat audience and the other participants who are listening through Facebook Live and other platforms. Mr. Damani is the managing partner at Artha Venture Fund, AVF, India's first early stage micro VC fund that invests in startups before their Series A. He is also the founder of Early Office and firmly believes that investing in startups at the early stage creates the maximum impact in their life cycle. Currently, he holds a portfolio of 85 plus startups, as Nagarajan sir mentioned, across sectors. And some of the outstanding portfolio companies, just to highlight, is Agnikul, Oyo Rooms, Purple, Baby Chakra, Outlook, and many more. Anirudh is going to share the basic secret sauce of how do you start your dream and really succeed in starting it off. I don't want to stand between the speaker of today and the audience. Anirudh, welcome you on behalf of iHub and Government of Gujarat. We are eager to learn from you. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahanta. I am deeply honored for this invite and for really the support that I've received and the insights that I've received from yourself and Mr. Nagarajan sir. It's very interesting to also tell the audience that I started my entrepreneurial career in India, actually in the city of Ahmedabad. So I came, my family has some hospitality projects over there, and I had actually come to see if I could possibly, become owner for those projects and run those projects. And I spent almost a month and a half in Ahmedabad before starting my entrepreneurial journey. And so I learned a lot about the energy that really exists out there in Ahmedabad, and it's a city that I visit, I think, at least once a quarter, because I mean, and as we get into it, we'll talk about what this little state of India, maybe in terms of population, only 5% of the entire population of India is over there, but look at the magic that it has created globally. And I'm really excited to be able to present today to all the budding entrepreneurs. And I look forward to working with a lot of you, because quite honestly, we have not even scratched the surface when it comes to entrepreneurship and the potential of entrepreneurship in India. I believe the number of unicorns we have in India today, Gujarat could have all of them by itself, right? So there is a potential to create tens of numbers of unicorns in India, and Gujarat, because of the entrepreneurial talent, because of the industrial policies and the amazing infrastructure that already exists in the state, should be a bellwether, should be the leader of the lot. So, sir, with your permission, if I may start and start sharing with the audience. So my presentation really is catered really towards the early stage entrepreneurs. Typically somebody that is probably a couple of quarters before they come to us, and considering that this obviously is catering to the audience that iHub serves today. But I'll just give a very brief introduction. I think sir has already done a fantastic job, but I obviously started India's first micro VC fund that invests only in startups that are in the early stages. I also run a part-time blog called Show Me the Money, and we'd be happy to have any one of you all read some of the blogs I write about entrepreneurship, I write about investing in startups, and I also write a lot about books. And hopefully, in fact, the outline of this presentation is also something that I'm working on as a book that I'll write in the future. I'm an active board member on multiple startups, 85 plus investments and the portfolio is spread over India, Israel, the US, and we've just made our first couple of investments in Southeast Asia. And we're also looking at entering Africa from the family office perspective. Over the 8 years of knowledge and experience that I've gained as an investor is what I intend to share with the audience today. So in the investment portfolio, we've really been blessed, that we've been part of some amazing stories in India. A lot of these companies that I'm showing you today have started off with one or two people in a room with an idea, and today many of these guys are probably employing over hundreds of people, if not some of them employing thousands of people. But those are the only just the direct impact that they have made. But if you look at the suppliers that these companies are working with the inputs that they provide to the companies where they are supplying, and the kind of impact that they have created at an indirect level, you're talking about tens of thousands of people getting a job for every single company that does well. So it's not just about the people that are directly employed, it's also about the people that get indirectly employed by a company, and therefore the startup ecosystem, and it's that remains the strength of the economy, as the Prime Minister keeps talking about, is very, very important. Let's start it off, right? Let's talk about what's happening in India. So at even today, right, India is currently at about 150 million, about 15 crore people are currently transacting online in India. And that number is expected to triple over the next 5 years. So we're looking at almost 35 crore people in India will be transacting online. And that will lead to almost a 4x increase in the penetration of e-commerce towards the overall retail sector. And what does that mean? That will actually get us only to about 14 or 15% of the overall retail market in India. Only 14 to 15% of that will be transacting online. And if you look at where the developed economies are today, even a country like China, they're at 26% today. So within 5 years, they should probably be closer to 40%, and there'll still be a huge place to catch up. So for entrepreneurs that are out there, this is really where the opportunity is at. And while, let me also be very, very clear, while I talk very specifically about e-commerce, I'm not specifically talking about just the consumer sector. One must understand that when the consumer sector like e-commerce does well, a lot of B2B sectors on the back end of it also do well, right? For example, if you're ordering a watch, or if you're ordering the latest iPhone and it's being delivered to you through Flipkart, understand all the B2B companies that are required to make that transaction complete, right? Everything from the payment gateway to the companies that actually do the order checking in between Flipkart and the supplier, to the logistic companies and all the SMSs that are coming through. There's an entire ecosystem that is running on the Indian consumer, and therefore this is really a very important slide, a very important thing for all of us to understand, that when this 3.4 number becomes 15%, when you're looking at $120 billion in just sales online, look at the entire ecosystem that is going to take with it, right? Then there's going to be jobs created in logistics, there's going to be jobs created for the consumer sector, there's going to be jobs created in the CSR sector, there's going to be fresh demand required, fresh manufacturing required, contract manufacturing is going to take off. So there is an entire element that is going to go on, which is going to lead to a massive digital economy existing out of India. And therefore, when the Prime Minister, a year or so ago promised a $5 trillion economy with $1 trillion coming from startups, he wasn't just making up those numbers. He understands what the potential of India is and where it exists. So any one of you guys that is out there, understand that whether this may not directly impact your business, but this definitely will indirectly impact your business when you are looking at the growth of the consumer sector in India. So there is significant potential. I mean, India today is almost getting to a 1 billion internet users that have access. We have roughly about 600 million smartphones, and that is also expected to increase to over 1 billion over the next 5 years. And that lies the opportunity. Like every single person today, your smartphone is your retail store. You don't need to go to a store anymore. You can transact at any given point of time. And that is also done on the back of this cheap internet. India today is the cheapest country for access to internet in the world. And I'm talking specifically about mobile internet. Today, we are paying roughly about 25 cents a gigabyte, right? Compare that to the US, where they are spending almost $5 to $10 per gigabyte for 4G data. So you can imagine, even on a US level, we are already at less than 5% cost of what everybody else is paying, right? And that, why these internet companies or why these telecom companies are providing this data very cheap? Because 75% of India's population is still under the age of 35, right? And what that means is that these are all the guys that are going to come online and they're going to be transacting online. In many ways, today I at 37 am actually outside that age group, but I can still tell you there is a huge potential of people coming into the ecosystem that are still not transacting online. And your companies could really be the first people to take those guys online and show them the potential and the power of transacting online. And because obviously the access to internet, the fact that there is everything and more available online, there is also the fact that there's going to be a much higher share of someone's income getting spent online. Also, it makes sense from a retailer perspective or from a distributor perspective or even from a company perspective to be online, because the cost of offline distribution is so expensive and so onerous that it actually makes better sense to directly supply to the customer and save all this cost in between. I can take an example of even the online mattress companies. Today, if you go to anyone like a Wakefit or you go to a Sleepy Cat, you can buy a mattress online for 25,000 rupees, which will be a foam mattress. Now, the same mattress, if you were going to an offline store, would probably cost you upwards of 75,000 to ₹1,00,000 rupees. Now, why is that the difference? The difference is that Wakefit directly delivers the mattress to your house. It does not have any stores. It does not have any offline distribution. Everything is direct. But when you are talking to when you are in the space where you're coming, to an online offline distribution, you have to pay all this capital. You've got to employ workers, you've got to keep inventory, you have to maintain the distributors, pay them margin, pay the retailers margin, and all of that is going to cost money. So why is Gujarat the right place to start up, right? First of all, it's got really high economic growth, right? Today, Gujarat, like I said, contributes 5% to India's population, but contributes 25% of India's exports. Also, in the overall GDP, Gujarat contributes 7.5% towards the overall GDP of India. Now, compare that, so obviously we are, as a state, Gujarat is taking in less than it's giving, right? And that's always been the reason why there's a talented and skilled labor pool in Gujarat. It's obviously the hub. Many listed companies find themselves in Gujarat. In fact, I think as of the last count, the top 29 companies out of the top BSE 500 actually find their home in Gujarat. Right? That's Adani, Reliance, Gujarat Gas, and Torrent Power, so on and so forth. And one of the key elements, and I've been in the power sector for 10 years before I turned a VC, right, is that Gujarat today has a surplus of power. And that means that in Gujarat, the power prices are some of the cheapest in the country. And therefore, I think, a lot of manufacturing capacity has come to Gujarat and will continue to build in Gujarat. And there are a lot of opportunities for startups to work with these kind of companies. There's access to a top education institutes, and I've heard of so many people that are actually moving to Ahmedabad for some of the schools that exist, right? That in Ahmedabad, and the fact that the quality of life is probably better in Ahmedabad today than it is in Bombay. So, guys, obviously we are not out of. It's not like Gujarat is far behind in the startup ecosystem. I hope some of you guys know who these people are, but if you don't, these are the two founders of Beardo. They've created a miracle in Gujarat already. Two guys started off with 3 crores in capital, and about a few months ago sold their company to Marico at over 300 crores, right? And I know this because I invested in their company and I've been there for the journey. In fact, 2 days after we received the exit amount, we actually had Ashutosh on my show called The Money Talks, and we had a very candid conversation on how he built a venture in Gujarat. And one of the things he told me towards the end of the interview, and guys, you're happy to just go to Instagram, go to my Instagram handle, you'll find the video, or you can go to Spotify or to Apple Podcast to find the podcast version. He very clearly states that the next venture, whenever he builds it, and the ones he's going to build in the future, they will all be built out of Ahmedabad. So it tells you the kind of confidence an entrepreneur has in the local ecosystem, and therefore all of you guys that are listening in from Ahmedabad, from Gujarat, from the state should have in the local ecosystem, because you have great stories already happening in the startup ecosystem today. So some other innovative startups from Gujarat that I've been able to find, Torchit, Keepsake, Pedology, Plushv, Let's Recycle, all of these companies I have, we have not invested in them, but at some point we've been able to talk to them, and we've looked at those business models and we've thought about whether we should invest in them or not. And these are all again coming from your state. So what are the different stakeholders involved? And I'll start off and give you guys some perspective on what the different kind of investors are there in the ecosystem, right? First of all, when you're looking at the cap table of your company, the first person that exists over there is you yourself as the founder. Then you look at bringing on a co-founder who typically will do half the work or quarter of the work. And based on how much work he's doing, you'll probably give him that much equity. After that, the first capital that you should probably be raising, is going to be from friends and family, right? Because those are the guys that actually believe in you, they know you. And that usually is the first place any entrepreneur goes to raise his first round of capital. After that, after you've raised the friends and family round, you've got your company set up, you've got a semblance of the fact that you've got some traction, you've got a market that you're hitting up. Then comes the angel investor, right? That's at the time when you approach people that are in angel investment groups, you approach an early stage VC fund like us, who will put anywhere between $200,000 to $1 million into a company. And from there on, the fundraising cycle for you starts, right? As you grow, as you prove that the traction, that the potential of your business is there and it's growing and you're able to grow quickly, you realize more and more venture capital funds will come after you to invest into your growth. And then you'll be able to get better employees who will who earlier may not have wanted to be a part of your company simply because you probably did not have the ability to generate enough cash to pay them, or also the fact that your equity was not valuable till the VCs came on board. And then you can start getting better employees, right? And then those better employees will take your company to a higher level. And at that time, you'll either will do something that what Ashutosh did, or you do a merger with a much larger company, or you'll probably be hiring investment bankers doing an IPO like Root Mobile, which IPO'd a couple of days back, and you'll be selling your equity portion. Many of your investors will be selling their equities during the IPO, and after that, anyone who can buy your shares on the bourses is actually an investor. So that's usually the life cycle of investors that you're going to deal with as you grow your company. Guys, if there's any questions, please feel free. I think we have a chat bot over here, so we'll be able to answer questions as we go. So where do we land up? I'm between an angel investor and a venture capitalist, right? Where I usually come in is when your venture has got early validation, it's got some sales, so it's not at MVP stage, but as it's starting to get some traction, we invest at that stage, and we keep investing in your company through multiple rounds, all the way up to Series A, till we find you a Series A lead, and you are ready to scale. And that ensures that that you don't have to keep going out there and raising capital. We are here. We'll keep investing in your company, and we'll also find you all the right partners. We're heavily involved operationally into all our investee companies, and we'll also ensure that at Series A we're able to find you the lead investor, because we'll also be writing a significant check into the round. So that basically is the sweet spot that we invest in. And if your venture is in that stage, you should definitely reach out to me, and I'll be happy to talk to you guys about how we can be partners in your business. So now that you guys know what we do, what the potential is there, let's talk about how does one set up to start up. If there's any questions, again, feel free to ask them, and we'll be more than happy to answer. So how to start a startup? Very simply, this is a diagram that I've copied from Paul Graham. In fact, it's from an essay that he wrote. Right. First of all, you need to start your company with a problem that you face. Right. There has to be a burning passion of why you want to solve this problem. Right. So typically, it's with you start off by saying, okay, what is missing in this world? Right. So if you're looking at an Uber and you're saying, okay, how did Uber really start? Right. So what was missing in the world was you come down and you're standing below your building and you're looking for a taxi, you can't find one, right? So shouldn't it be easy to find all the drivers that are in the city who can give you a ride on a single app? And that's how you say, okay, this is what was missing in the world. You write that problem down, you decide to make a prototype. It doesn't have to be fancy, right? You just have to make the prototype, right? You show it to 100 people, and then you get some feedback. Usually these 100 people are your friends, your family, anybody who, even sometimes, it could be strangers, just to understand whether they actually see the problem that you are talking about. And based on the feedback, you'll iterate, you'll come up with a prototype, you'll find a co-founder after that to help you with the idea. And post that, you'll be one second, please. I've got my dog all stuck up in the wires here. Max, sit. Sorry about that. After that, you find a co-founder who's willing to work with you on the idea. You register the company, split the equity with him. Then you start looking for funding, right? And as you're looking for funding, launch, right? Start selling. And what you're doing at that time is you're looking at whether the people you're selling to, are they coming back, right? Are they? And if you get your first 1,000 users, can you grow them 5% week on week? If you can keep on growing those numbers, you'll have every single investor running behind you. And if you're not, then go back and figure out how can you get people to follow. How can you get people to come back to you again and again? There's obviously something that you're missing. I need to keep finding that answer and keep coming back to it again and again and again. Like Airbnb relaunched itself 3 times. Many companies in Mobi started as Mcoach, and Oyo started as Oravel, and Purple actually started as a massage booking service. So everybody had a very different idea when they started, and they had to figure out, okay, what am I really missing? Why aren't the customers coming back? And by paying attention to those numbers, by paying attention to the growth, they were able to find out what they were really missing, and then create a massive business by pivoting at the right time. So how do you pivot? It's very simple, right? There's a book, and I believe every single entrepreneur should read it. It's called the Lean Startup Methodology, right? It talks about 3 things: learn, build, measure, right? And it's in a circle, right? So you first should learn about the problem that you're trying to solve, build a prototype, and then measure the result. And as you measure the result, you learn something more, right? And from that learning, again, start building or rebuilding or building on top of what you had built in the past, and then measure again. And you keep doing this cycle again and again and again. The key is to get through the cycle as fast as you can, right? So you build quickly, you measure all the time, and as soon as you learn something from that measurement, you build again. And you keep doing this loop again and again and again. The faster you do it, you'll see your startup grow even quicker than you can imagine, right? And I don't have to explain this methodology at all. This book is available. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to do something massive, you need to read this book, The Lean Startup Methodology. But something that I believe in is that before you focus on venture capital, always focus on customer capital, right? Find the right customers, because even as a VC, right, I'd like to know, besides me, who else is willing to fund the business, right? And I don't mean which other investors are willing to fund the business. I want to see which other customers are willing to fund your business. And therefore, I always like entrepreneurs that focus on the customer, that want, that they're always figuring out how to sell, right? How to sell at a premium, how to sell at a profit. These are all very, very important aspects to a business that will grow in the future. So focus on customer capital. And what should you as a founder be doing? There's 5 things that you should always be doing. You should be the customer champion, the capability builder, the innovation catalyst, the chief storyteller, and the growth driver. And trust me, I can tell you this from a very personal aspect, that I do that even today as a venture fund manager for myself, for my own fund. I have to be the customer champion. My customers are my founders, right? So I make sure that the entire organization is focused on helping our founders post investments, right? We analyze all the data from our founders. We have teams that specifically go out and even will benchmark that data to what is available in the industry. And for every single entrepreneur that we invest in, every single founder we invest in, we've got a different plan for each one of them. So it's not a one size fits all. So therefore, that comes from my own, learning, my own motivation, that all founders do not require the same level of mentorship. They don't require the same level of support. Everyone requires a different level, and therefore we need to innovate even when we're dealing with each and every founder. So if I consider founders as my customers, who do you consider as your customer? Right? How are you personalizing the journey for them? Right? These are very, very important questions for you to answer. How are you building how are you building capability? Once you figured out how to sell to your customer, once you figured out how to keep your customer, now how do you ensure that you can get more of them? Right? I can promise you, in a country like India, and this is something my dad said all the time, in a country like India, all you need is to convince 1% of the population in your product, right? And that's 10 million people, and you'll become super, super, super duper rich. So first figure out who is your target audience, and trust me, they will find millions of those people in India. But once you figure that out, you have to be ready to build capacity. You have to be ready to build scale, right? And scale will also bring it with itself a lot of issues. You have to keep innovating, right? One of the companies in our portfolio has grown 6x in 2 weeks. Their servers are overheating. They're having to rewrite code overnight, and they have to do so many things, because when the scale doesn't give you a phone call and come, scale just comes, right? So you have to be ready. You have to be ready to innovate, because when that capacity that you built, it explodes and things explode beyond that capacity, how are you going to make sure that the customers are not disappointed? Because a disappointed customer will not come back. So you as the founder are also the innovation catalyst. You also have to be ready that when I'm scaling and things are breaking down, that I'm able to innovate, I'm able to think on my feet, and I'm able to respond to the situation. You as a founder has to be the chief storyteller, right? You are the one telling the story of the venture, whether you're telling it to an investor, to a potential employee, to your current employees, to your family, to your wife, to your son, even to your dog, right? If you're spending most of your time in the business, right, and you as a founder are supposed to sell equity in the business and say that it's a great business, should you be the person who's a great storyteller to be able to explain to them how your business is growing and why it's growing, and how you built a great team that is solving a great problem and developing great scale and is going to make great amounts of money, right? And obviously all of that leads to the fact that you are the growth driver. So this is something that these are 5 things that every single founder should be doing at all times. And I'll be sharing this presentation with the iHub team, so please, this is something that every founder should focus on a daily basis. How can you improve yourself in these 5 areas all the time? And I think, as you guys know, I hope, Mahantaji, I'm not going too fast, but if I talk about the startups, I should also talk about why startups fail, right? And this data comes from CB Insights. They've been analyzing startups for over 20 years, and one of the top 10 reasons startups fail, most people would have always answered to me in presentations and seminars, that not being able to raise money is the number one reason why a startup fails. And quite honestly, it doesn't even figure in the first 15, right? The number one reason why startups fail is because you built a product or a service, but the market does not need it, right? That is the number one reason, that whatever you are selling, nobody is willing to buy, right? And when there is no market need, it doesn't matter, your business is going to fail, right? So if either you've not paid attention to the customer or you've not paid attention to what the problem was, but either one of those things did not get solved, and therefore your customers do not need what you're building. Second is running out of cash, right? And that is not a factor of fundraising. Remember, it's running out of cash. Not being able to raise cash is a whole different problem. So most companies also, while they're going through these iterative processes, are not paying attention to how much money they're spending. They're not raising enough, or they're raising too little or too much, or they're spending too much for that matter. So number two problem is running out of cash. So if you don't have a market need and you realize you're running out of cash, probably a good time to stop spending and trying to figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve, or who is it that we're solving this problem for. Third thing is not the right team, right? Hiring a bunch of friends is not the right way to build any company, right? You need to be able to hire motivated people. They're going to work even when you're not around, right? They all are driven by they have a burning need to solve the same problem that you have, and therefore, hire the people that are not like you. Hire people that are good in areas that you are bad at, right? Otherwise, you're going to get outcompeted, right? And pricing and cost issues again are not a factor of not understanding your customer. These top 10 reasons, I can go through them one by one, but the point is that running out of or not being able to raise capital has never been a problem with which a company shut down. Because if you had a great market need, you are having great customers, you have great traction, you're making you're at least profitable at a unit economic level, it is impossible for you to not to be able to raise capital. In fact, I can name so many businesses today, even like a Wow Momos, where they got to 40 stores open without raising any outside capital. They proudly say that the only capital we raised was customer capital. They understood their customer, they understood how to sell to their customer, they understood how to sell at unit economic profitability, and they were able to build 40 restaurants without using a single investor paisa, right? That is the kind of business that most funds then run after. They did an angel round, guys, at an unheard valuation of 95 crores, right? Most angel rounds happen at 8 to 15 crore. They did that as 95 crores. Today, the founders own 70% of the business because they could delay raising capital for as long as possible by finding customers instead of funders. And that's what you should concentrate on. And I think this is pretty much my second last slide. So it's also important that when you are pitching to investors, it's a little grainy, guys. This comes from pair.vc. It's also important to understand that when you are pitching to investors, at which stage, what should you be pitching to the investor, right? When you're at pre-seed stage, this is basically when you're, at when you're presenting to iHub or an accelerator like iHub, right? They typically are looking at the team, right? For them, traction and market is secondary, but is the team good? Because that's very clear that whatever idea you have come up with, it's going to pivot. So is the team good? Is it teachable? Is it going to work hard? Is it going to study hard? Are they going to pay attention to the customers? That is most important at a pre-seed level. Then when you come to us, for us, traction is also important. Because for us, obviously, team is validated, team has to be good. But is there actual traction? Are you actually selling to people, right? Are people actually willing to buy? It doesn't have to be a lot of traction, but there has to be some traction. Then when you're raising your Series A, which is your growth round, the metrics completely change. Now what's important is you've got traction, you've got a solid team, but how big is the market? Because when someone is pumping cash into your company, right, they'll only pump cash with the assumption that there's a huge market that you need to capture, and that when you capture a huge chunk of that market, your company will be valued at multiples, right? And that's how they're going to make their money. And obviously, when you go public, it's all on revenues, right? Anybody will tell you that when you go public, what matters is revenues and profits, right? And so when you're pitching to your investors, you need to understand what you're pitching at what time. So if you start pitching to a pre-seed guy about how big the market is, but there's no team, right? Or how good your traction is, but there's no team, right? Then you're not going to win it, right? And when you come to seed, if you're pitching somebody how awesome the market is, but you have no traction, right? Again, you're too early, right? You need to understand when you're pitching to who you're pitching to, and based on which stage you are in your venture. And obviously the Prime Minister has gone out and talked about Atmanirbhar Bharat. So today we've got 32 unicorns across the country. As you can see, the number of unicorns India is making has increased year on year. Expectation is that we'll be building 10 to 12 unicorns year on year from now till 2025, right? Because we're going to capture almost 75 to 80 billion dollar market, which is offline currently, is going to come online, right? So huge number of unicorns coming right now, 32 as of last count. Let's put Gujarat on this list. So many ways to reach me. I am available on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram. Feel free to reach out to me on any one of these mediums. We are very quick in responding to people that reach out to me. If you email me, email me your pitch deck. But I would prefer if you could get someone that I know to refer it to me. So if Mr. Mahanta or someone like that would refer your deck, that would really put you on the top of the list. So that's it from my end. Any questions?
Thank you so much for highlighting the facts. I will pick few questions with your permission, and maybe you can address that to clarify some of the queries from audience. So should we go ahead, sir? Yeah. So Mr. Anirudh, one question which comes to our mind, as you rightly mentioned, is able to raise fund at able to raise resources at right time is very important. So one question I can see from the audience is, does it necessarily says that if you are in a better mature ecosystem, or if you are in tier 1, tier 2 kind of ecosystem, your chance of getting access to those kind of investors easy, or even you can be in tier 2 cities and still on the merit of your product, you can get resources?
So great question. So I was just reading a report from Bain today, and that says that right now, out of every 5 online orders, 3 of them come from Bharat, which is the Bharat that exists outside the metro cities. So quite honestly, we as VCs very clearly know that the next unicorns that are going to come are not going to come from Bombay, they're not going to come from Bangalore, they're not going to come from Delhi. We'll get a few, but the big thrust of it is going to come from ventures that are located outside of Bombay, right? Look at Vocal, look at all these vernacular languages. Expectation is 500 million people are going to transact in vernacular languages in India. So that is where the opportunity is at. So quite honestly, it doesn't matter where you exist in the country. If you've got a great idea, we'll come to you, right? I've invested in companies as far as Kanpur, right? And this was at a time when Kanpur did not have a working airport, right? So I found a way to get to Kanpur because there was a company wanted to invest in. So it really isn't a factor of to really quote one of the investors in India, Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, he says, if the bride is beautiful, the suitors will come. If you build a beautiful company, we'll find our way to you.
Wonderful. Nice way of portraying it, by the way, and a good anecdote. So, one question. What is your strategy for scouting good startups for investing? How do you do it? Do your own curated call for demo days, or how do you do it?
So quite honestly, we have a very strong network of entrepreneurs, a very strong network of co-investors, and also of professionals that we work with, like organizations like yourself. And we are very clear that we only invest in companies that are referred to us. So we rely on this network to actually send us companies. Usually we get anywhere between 1,200 to 2,000 companies a year, and we only invest in about 10 of them. So and thankfully, because the network is so strong, I've been in this ecosystem for such a long time. Usually, if a deal is happening in early stage, we have definitely seen it.
Wonderful. One question that I can see, and which is also a common question from the ecosystem, is generally how much time a startup should take, right, from the ideation to Series A. Typically, if it is not a healthcare or something kind of a typical average, what is the duration that one startup should take? Because somebody is saying that if we don't know that and it take more time in the runway, probably we have lesser runway left out for capturing value. Do you agree on that?
So it really depends, quite honestly. I have seen companies raise Series A in less as 18 months, 24 months, right? I have seen companies take 8 years to raise Series A, right? I've seen companies take even 12 years to raise Series A, right? So quite honestly, it's really is a factor. But Many times, even delaying the Series A makes sense if you're getting significant traction, right? And you're dealing your Series A because to capture some of that traction. That also makes sense. So I think Series A really is a factor of where your venture is at. Every venture is not the same. Even sometimes in B2B or even in consumer, you may take a longer time to raise Series A, but then your Series B, Series C, Series D become much faster. So I don't have a single answer for that question. But pay attention to your cash burn, right? If you're burning quicker than you're going to raise money, then find a way to cut the cash burn or find a way to get more revenues.
How important is for a startup to become choosy in terms of getting money from even institutional investors? Does it really matter? Because one particular question I can say is sometimes the chemistry between the investing entity or the institutional investor and the startup doesn't really go well in terms of decision making or vision and certain factors. So how important is it, or would you like to a little bit elaborate how it really matters, that marriage between the investor and the investor?
See, color of money is the same. Right now, all I would say is that unless you've got multiple term sheets, take the offer you have on the table, right? Or again, I'll say, if do you have the ability to run the business without taking in capital, right? And finding alternate sources of capital, right? Debt, customer, all that kind of stuff, customer deposits, for example. But if you can't and you really need the money, right, and the business is not going to survive without the money, so you have a fiduciary responsibility to do best what is what is best for the company, not what is best for you, right? You as a founder eventually will become a shareholder, right? Most listed companies today are not run by the largest shareholder, right? They're run by professionals. So if you're eventually going to be the shareholder of the company and not the guy running it, your fiduciary responsibility as a founder is to do what is best for the company, not what is best for yourself. You don't have chemistry, then great. Go find 5 other term sheets where you have great chemistry. But if you can't, then take the capital that is there on the table, right? Or otherwise find different ways to raise capital. But you can't say that I'm going to stunt the growth of the business because I can't gel with this investor, right? Unless you've got multiple term sheets. And I keep saying, either get multiple term sheets or take the term sheet you have on the table.
I think this is a very beautiful way of putting it together, that you incidentally will become a shareholder once the company grow, and not having that kind of long-term perspective sometimes really hampers the startup.
So I mean, if you look at most listed companies, Ratan Tata does not run all the. In fact, he wasn't even the founder of many of the companies where he is now chairman, right? And if Ratanji is in that position, all of us are going to be in that position at some point.
I think that's really wonderful, and I very clear. It is quoted that before you enter into an idea, you should know how to exit. Because that's very important. Because in that sense, what is the trajectory, and if you don't follow that, then probably in the process of putting everything together, you actually break that baby, and that's kind of really important. So you rightly mentioned while you were talking about the team aspects, and you told that don't make a bunch of friends together and build a company, because you can't abuse them even if they are worth it, and that's becoming very, very important. So when you might have seen good companies collapsed or not performed up to the mark because of average team or something like that. So what is your suggestions in terms of, suppose there are solo tech guys who want to build a company, how do they go out, reach out people to founders? Which are the best avenues to go and figure out?
You're talking about tech founders who are looking for other people. See, you have to understand the main thing over here is, sir, that you have to actually be honest to yourself of what you're not good at. What happens is that when you lie to yourself that I can easily find somebody in sales, they're obviously going to make mistakes. What a good strategy to find a co-founder is to look around. In fact, many of the people that we have invested in, right, they found their co-founders actually on sports teams that they were playing on. So one person was playing on a cricket team, and he found his co-founder there. Another guy was playing on a football team, found his co-founder over there. Just put down, in a message, right? Typically, maybe let's say 300 or 400 characters. Put down exactly what you're looking for in a co-founder, right? That he needs to be good at sales, or he needs to be good at operations, whatever it is that you're looking for. Put that into a message and share that within your closest network. They are going to find you the right people faster than anybody else. There's no recruiter, no online medium is going to find you people that will gel with you faster than somebody than your own network, and then circulate that. That's how most people have found co-founders. But be very honest with what you're not good at, and ensure that you're not lying to yourself, because then you'll find somebody that probably doesn't solve the problem that really exists.
Wonderful. Sir, one more question. So when you have, as you mentioned, lean is the only way to go. And in the beginning phase, you iterate with your product and features and go to customer, take feedback. And after a certain point of time, when you go for a validation, you actually try to figure out what is the business model is. So how much time generally a startup need to take to validate a timeline in which we must stop experimenting our business model? I mean, what is the typical average time that startups should take to validate the business model before they go to scale up?
So I think you should experiment all the time, quite honestly. We're living in a world where the pace of technology is such that that innovation is changing every 2 years, right? You're looking literally a technology built today will be obsolete in 2 years, right? So we cannot stop innovating. We must innovate all the time. I think in terms of when should you stabilize, what your business model is going to be for the current run, is when you figure out unit economics, right? If you've got a model where there is positive unit economics, there is a sizable market to address, and you're able to capture it, I think that's the time when you should really go hard, right? Because now you can make money on a transaction level. That there is a large market, so go capture it as quickly as you can, right? That's the time when you really need to put your what we call in the US, your pedal to the metal, right? Just press the accelerator as hard as you can.
Wonderful. I think you rightly mentioned that sooner you figure out the unit economics, the positive curve, probably that's the signal of taking off and scaling it off. But that's very important. Sir, one common question that we see from the early stage entrepreneurs, whether they should look India as a larger market if it is a B2C or B2B, both the cases, or even if they are getting traction outside, they should put energy, because some of the startups feel the sales cycle outside India seems to be more systematic, more smaller than Indian sales cycle, typically in B2B segments. So what is your advice for startups in B2B space? Whether to first try in a domestic market for a consistent time and then go outside, or what's your suggestion?
I'll specifically talk about B2B. I think B2C is a little different market. On the B2B angle, I think India is the best market to capture before you go outside. Let me explain why. We are a price-sensitive market, so we're cutthroat when it comes to pricing. Every single state of India, we are the most diverse market in the world. There are entire continents that have less diversity than we do, right? If you look at the way business is done between even Ahmedabad and Bombay, but even Ahmedabad or even Bombay and Pune, or Ahmedabad and Jaipur, it changes so rapidly, right? That the language changes, the way they do business changes, the way they talk changes, even their style of English changes, right? If you can build a technology, and I read this in the TCS book, right? The TCS story written by Mr. Ramadurai, and he says very clearly that once you've built an India business that can cater to multiple Indian states, your technology and your processes are so robust, they are so dynamic, it can go to the world, right? It can literally scale to the world. And because now you can go to a different country and your technology stack is so good, because if it could figure out how to manage a customer between Punjab to, let's say, a Karnataka, right, where the languages are completely different, they don't even look similar, you can take that anywhere in the world, right? So build a business that is robust in India, try to scale to India first, and then what you realize that when you go outside India, right, you are able to scale in that market so much more quicker. So think of India is your dojo, right? Dojo is where the samurai practice, and think of the world as as the battlefield. So what the samurai always says that you cry in the dojo, you laugh in the battlefield, right? So when you are in India, you might feel it's so difficult, it's so tough, it's such a price sensitive market. But the thing is, it's really preparing you to go to the world, right? And when you go there, the realizations are higher, the sales are much simpler, your technology stack is so robust, it can take on any country. What more do you want, right? India exports almost $150 billion worth of IT services a year. There is a reason for that.
Wonderful. Sir, one more question I would like to be interested personally to ask. The ecosystem that we see globally, has grown up exponentially because some of the early startups have actually nurtured the next startups through their first series of employees. And if you look at the unicorns that India is also seeing, many people who started in the first league of Flipkarts and others, they came out from the companies and they ventured into new things. So, how important is to kind of contribute back to this ecosystem by successful entrepreneurs or the first cohort of people in terms of taking the ecosystem ahead? I'm asking it for two contexts because Gujarat also has a large number of successful entrepreneurs. We also have a large number of progressive MSMEs. And probably, like Artha Venture is doing a critical role in terms of taking it from your familiar businesses to taking it to next stage. We might have more people. We have deeper pockets people in our ecosystem also. But how important it is, and if it is important, what should we do?
I can't stress the importance of the fact that if we want India to be a developed country in the next 20, 25 years, right, that the only way to do it is by growing startups. Right? Entrepreneurship is the only answer. There is no way a Tata, Reliance, Adani, any one of these conglomerates can create enough jobs, and to actually put every single Indian into employment. That is only going to come through entrepreneurship, which the Prime Minister has very clearly articulated in his policies. Now, what is interesting, and like you mentioned, that there is something known as the Flipkart gang, right? Those are the entrepreneurs that came out of, or the workers of Flipkart that came out and built companies, and they themselves have become massive companies today. In fact, Paytm, one of the early employees, first 50 employees at Paytm, this girl called Prerna, she actually works with me as a founder, right? And she's the founder of a company called Dalchini, and you can see the difference in her level of scale, what she thinks, than any other entrepreneur that you meet. So that is very important. What is also important is like people like Ashutosh, right, from Beardo, they have already started investing in startup, right? They've got their exit money. Now they started investing into startups because they obviously understood what it took. And so they now know that besides the money, I can add some more plus to the model. And I think they owe it, every single entrepreneur that makes money out of this ecosystem, and these guys have obviously made a fantastic exit, they owe it to the ecosystem to come back and contribute, right? You can't just take away from this ecosystem. You have to come back and give and give and give, right? Because that's how we'll build a great country. That's how we'll build a great ecosystem, because India has the potential to be the number one entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world. Most number of people, such a huge middle class. We have all the metrics that you need to make a great masala movie, right? All we need now is intent.
Wonderful. I think thank you so much for so eloquently putting the fact in place that entrepreneurship is the religion that we should follow for at least a couple of decades in India for the inclusive growth, and all the subsequent goals like Atmanirbhar Bharat and others are going to come happening in this way. And I think all the young people who are listening to your talk today, both in the Gujarat startup ecosystem or others, immensely benefited from you, and the way you presented the perspective, right, from how do you build the team, how do you ensure that you get right cast, and the strategies that we should adopt to ensure that we also get into people like you who can potentially support. That was really thankful, and I must thank Nagarajan sir for joining us today in this conversation. Thank you, Anirudh, for finding out time to talk to Gujarat ecosystem, and many people will be interested to reach out to you, in fact, for sending their pitch deck or into platforms. So may I now request Nagarajan sir to sum up the conversation and share a few words before we wind up.
I think a lot of things have been thrown into the table today. I think I really can't do justice by summing up, but I'm glad that, a lot of ideas were floated today, and there were some pinpointed inputs to think about for the potential entrepreneurs. And as usual, we have got the best of Anirudh today, and it's going to be a memorable session. And I'm sure there will be more people who will be using this talk later on in our Facebook feed also. So thank you, Anirudh, for joining us today, and also extending your knowledge and insights on startup and ecosystem.
Thank you, Nagarajan sir. Thank you, Mr. Mahanta. I really appreciate the support, and looking forward to working with iHub and the Gujarat ecosystem in the years to come.